all in the 70th webinar of iTalk webinar and organized by Mero Eye Foundation. I am Asmita Maden and today I'll be moderating this session. As a speaker, we have with us Dr. Premnandhini Satgunam. She will be talking about a research writing paper. A brief introduction to our speaker. She is an associated research optometrist at LBPEI Hyderabad. Prior to that, she did her master and PhD from Ohio State University. Likewise, she also completed her postdoctoral fellow in vision rehabilitation at Schepens Eye Research Institute, Harvard Medical School. So today's topic may bring lots of questions from you all. So I'll make sure that we will address all the questions in the time we have today. So in the middle, if you have any questions or queries, you can just drop it down in our chat box and we will discuss in our discussion session. So without further delay, the session is over to you, Dr. Premnandhini.
Thank you, Asmita. Good afternoon, all. And I suppose in the COVID times, it's also become a sort of like a pattern to say, I hope all of you are staying safe and healthy. Can you see my screen? Is my screen visible, Asmita?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, fine. So I'm actually sharing my desktop because I'm sort of going to go in and out of PowerPoint. So first of all, before starting, of course, I would like to acknowledge and thank the group Mero Eye for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk with all of you and connect with you on this important topic that's called research paper writing. And I suppose this is the first time I'm doing a webinar for people in Nepal, and I'm very excited about it. I think as in every other country or culture, people who go out to seek knowledge, to learn more, are usually motivated, and that is no different with Nepalis also. I've had interacted with many of the Nepali students back during my time in Shankar Nethralaya and also during my time here in LV Prasad Eye Institute. I find them very motivated, very hardworking, and very eager to learn. So I'm extremely happy to be giving this presentation to all of you. So let's look at this topic, research paper writing. It is written in black and white. And there is also the rest of the elements that are written there in gray. And there is a reason why I've put this in this format. And this is to say that anything that is black and white need not always be necessarily true. Okay, so the first thing is to understand that there is always shades of gray in whatever research you're doing and whatever research paper that is written and published. Okay, when you are in your undergraduate education, you would read the Adler's physiology, the primary care optometry, and you would believe completely that whatever is written in the textbook is true. In fact, you will tell your patients or you would tell your colleagues that, I've read this in this book and that book says this, and you will make an argument that way. But remember, whatever is there in the book is actually bound to change. In fact, now is a good time to sort of explain about this fluidity in research. During the corona era that we are living in, we are finding different evidences that are coming in every day. Earlier, they said coronavirus is not airborne, and now the WHO is going back and saying that it is airborne. So there is a lot of confusion. So nothing is actually solidly set unless and until there is enough evidence accumulated, and then we know what exactly is the mechanism and how it is happening. Okay, so everything that we learn about life and science and arts, whatever, there is a step-by-step process to it. Okay, and you also would realize that I have not changed my slide. I'm staying on the same slide and I'm giving you all this background without showing colorful images and all of that. And the reason for that is to make a point that research can be actually very boring sometimes. It's very monotonous. It's a very lonely journey. And the paper writing is even more lonely because you're the only one sitting by yourself to write the paper. Okay. Research is as much as IQ. as it is about patience and perseverance. So it's not just enough if you're just intelligent and you can, remember things, recollect it, regurgitate it. That alone will not make you a good researcher. You need to have enormous patience and perseverance to sort of sustain on that problem and find answers. Okay, so that's the reason I sort of sustained on this title slide to give you all that background. Okay, so moving on with the topic, there are three aspects in this topic that we have chosen today, right? One is research, one is paper and writing. So I'm actually taking the title and I've broken it into the three components that the title comprises of. And the learning objectives from my presentation today would essentially say, first, we need to understand the concepts involved in doing research. First, you need to know what is research, why we are doing it. And then we need to understand, why is it that we write research papers? Why should you do that? And once after we understand these two concepts, then we will get into the writing aspects. And remember that I've not put a learning objective to say that you will learn how to write research papers. Okay, instead, I have said that I will give you some practical tips for writing papers. I must also say that I am not an extremely well published author. So it's not like I have 100 publications and 20 textbooks that I have written. And therefore, I am as much novice in this process as some of you are. Maybe the people who are listening to this talk, some of you probably have published papers, some of you are students and you're figuring out how to do this process. So we are all at different levels, and all I'm giving as a disclaimer here is to say that I am not a extremely well accomplished research paper writer either. In every paper that I write, I always learn, and I really see a lot of room for improvement. So what I'm going to give you as practical tips essentially is based on my experience, on what I have learned. And while my experience may not be vast, it might still give you some starting point on how to get on to this journey. And the fourth learning objective is ethics. And this is extremely important. And so we will go over the rest of the presentation with all these underlying concepts, and this will be our learning objectives as we move on. So the first one is, what is research? Okay, so let's give a very practical example for this. So let's say that I take a flight after the coronavirus has died down and I visit Kathmandu. I come to Nepal, right? I've never been to that country. I've heard it's a beautiful country, rich culture, a lot of temples. And of course, when you want to experience culture somewhere, you also find out what's the local food. And so I land in Kathmandu, I stay in a hotel, I say, okay, what's the common food here? And I find out it's momos, right? Now, all of this I have done by simply doing a Google search. With a Google search, I can find out where is the nearest restaurant, what's the common food for the locals here. Okay, it's momos. I go get the momos, I eat it there, I enjoy it, and I'm done. And therefore, I have not researched it. I have only searched it in Google search. But if I ever get interested about understanding and going in depth onto what is the origin of momos, which is the tribe that invented it, what's the cultural association with it, what's the nutrition value of it, and I could ask a lot of deep questions with just this one simple food item. And if I have to do that, if I really want to understand in depth, I'm not simply going to do a Google search, but rather I would go and do that on Google Scholar, right? And remember, there is Google search and there is no Google research. Instead, it's called Google Scholar. So the word scholar is very important. Scholar is somebody who knows the in and out of something. Okay, they would know what is exactly the definition, what are all the studies that have been associated with it. And so a given particular subject, they would completely understand the ups, downs, in, out, and all directions of that topic. Such a person is a scholar. And for you to become a scholar, in general, people pursue their PhD and higher degrees. And and it's not just enough that you get a PhD and then you become a scholar. And you need to dedicate the rest of your life doing the same thing and studying the same topic that has interested you. So The reason I'm spending time on this, the word scholar, is to say that you first have to understand have a complete understanding of what research is. And if I have to reflect myself for this word, I don't think I have reached the level of a scholar as yet. And one of the reasons is also because I diffuse myself and do different topics. I mean, I get interested in multiple things, and I've never really gone down in great depth, at least to my own level of judgment. Okay, so we go do Nepal Momos Nutrition, I say, Google Scholar. It retrieves 344 results in an incredible speed of 0.09 seconds. And therefore, you can look at, the things that are getting published. Okay, there is some nutritional status, and this paper has been published in that journal in the year 2016, cited by 14 and all of that. Okay. So the reason I'm going over this is essentially to say that before you start writing the paper, you actually would have to read papers. Okay. So reading and understanding what research is as much inherent to the process of how you write research papers. And therefore, how to read research paper is important as well. Now, how do you read research paper is beyond the scope of this presentation. And therefore, I would not touch upon that. But again, dwelling back on the question, what is research? Okay, the fundamental thing is you need to actually discover something new, something which is not, it's not a common knowledge. You cannot infer that information by combining several other papers, and every other paper seems to give that knowledge gap, and therefore you're going to discover something new. That's what research is. It is actually an original idea that you have, and this is the key. Okay, you need to have an idea, you need to think about, okay, why am I actually going to do this study, that sort of a thing, right? In the past, when I actually moved to the US for my graduate studies, I used to get some emails from students who are back in India, and they would ask me a question like, can you tell me some project idea? Okay, it's a very bad idea to ask somebody for a project idea. Okay, so don't ask anyone asking them, can you give me a project idea? And this habit is prevalent, not just in students. There are faculty whom I have met, and they would say that, I have students and we have this equipment, can you tell some ideas on what we can study? Okay, the whole purpose of doing a research actually has to originate from somebody's original idea. Okay, so nobody, if you go and meet somebody in the US or UK or Australia, wherever, and if you tell them this, give me a project idea, they would be shocked to hear that. Okay, because that's what is their research. Why would anybody share their ideas? Okay, so remember that the crux, the core of where research starts is actually having an original idea. So if you do not have an idea, okay, you can always replicate other studies, but that's not necessarily called a research. That might simply be just a student project, and you just wanted to learn how to do that project. That's all. That will not necessarily constitute research. Okay. Now, as I said in the beginning, that the purpose of this talk and the way I'm going to talk is based on my experience. Now, I'll tell you why I'm sort of following that style of presentation. If you Google research paper writing, you already will get a lot of information on this. Honestly speaking, there is no need of this webinar, because all people have to do is just search for that term. And I'm sure there are research articles on how to write research papers, right? So you will find materials, you will find papers published on this. So what is it that I am going to give new in this presentation? So this is the question I asked myself when I was preparing for this talk, because it has to be new, it has to be my own original idea. And it occurred to me that the way I can give you something new and something original is that I talk about how I learned how to write research papers. Okay, because that is purely my experience, and nobody would have had the same experience that other uh, anybody else wouldn't have had the same experience that I had. So that is why I'm going to sort of go in and out of the things that I have written and what I have learned from my training. So this is Professor Nick Fogg. He was my master's and PhD advisor at Ohio State University, College of Optometry. So before I started my project with him, uh, My master's project was completely my own idea. It was a very original idea, but my PhD was something that was also of interest to Dr. Fogg. But one thing that Dr. Fogg told me was, he said, Prem, if you want to do a PhD work, you should choose a project such that the project has a potential to fail. Okay, this is what he said. You'll have to do a project in which you have no idea what you're going to get, and that project should have a potential to fail, which means that you're actually taking a very risky project. That's what it means. Because he said that if you already know what your result is, okay, then you are merely finding, you have not discovered anything new, you're only adding a data point to an existing literature. Okay, so this graph that I have here, that has a x and a y, and the published literature are all your blue dots. So I cannot jump in and say, oh, but they didn't do this x and this y coordinate, and therefore I will do a research, and therefore I already have an answer to what I'm going to do as a research, right? So I know exactly what I'm supposed to be getting as an answer. So if I do something like that, then that's not called research, and that's definitely not a PhD project. Okay, so research is honestly trying to discover something new, and when you take up such research projects, it should have a potential to fail. Only then you're actually making a meaningful contribution to the literature. The reason I'm saying all this and I'm stressing on this is, I find that there are articles that gets published saying, what's the prevalence of myopia in China, what's the prevalence of myopia in southern India, what's the prevalence of myopia in Hyderabad, what's the prevalence of myopia in Nepal. Now, why are all these questions interesting? What is new in this? If all the human beings more or less have similar axial length and keratometry readings, and if there isn't any strong racial difference to explain why that expectation should be different, then why would you want to find the prevalence in Nepal and then Tibet and then Ladakh and then Delhi, right? So there is no point. And unless and until you can take up a project like that, but it actually comes with a very strong hypothesis. So unless and until you have a reason to believe, to say that, okay, this is why I think this population, which never gets UV exposure, okay, will probably have much more higher myopia. So unless there is a very strong reason to believe in why you will get anything different from what is already existing, then it is not interesting. Okay, so the hypothesis is very important. So every research is driven by hypothesis. So when you're writing the research paper, you in fact have to say what is the hypothesis that you're trying to test in the study that you're trying to publish. Okay, and many of the highly ranked reputed journals would look for this. Otherwise they would say there is no hypothesis that the authors are studying, and therefore we don't understand why this is novel idea. Okay, so it has to be new, interesting, and with a strong hypothesis driven project. Okay, so it's important. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about this word hypothesis, because what I see increasingly these days is students take up a research project and then they would say that we are doing this particular measurement of axial length under condition A and condition B. And their hypothesis, they will say the null hypothesis is measurements made in condition A will be the same as condition B. And then the alternate hypothesis is measurement made in condition A is not the same as condition B. Okay, so they put out a hypothesis and they say null is this, no difference, and then alternate is there will be some difference between the two conditions. Honestly, that's not a scientific hypothesis. And I say this because I know in our own student groups and training, we sort of let the students make this statement and we let them go because it's only a student project. But what we mean by scientific hypothesis is, for example, let's take coronavirus, right? So you're saying that these have spike receptors that will go and get hooked onto lungs, and there is the ACE2 inhibitors that we have to target as drugs in order to make sure this virus does not hatch on this. So if you are developing a drug A, drug B, you're trying to see which is more effective, your hypothesis is to say that this drug B is much more efficient in attaching to those anchor points, which will therefore then prevent the coronavirus from anchoring on to the host lung cells. So that is a strong hypothesis. And how is it making itself more sort of like viable to it? And maybe it's doing it through some chemical reactions, signals, the rate at which this drug is sort of getting diffused in the bloodstream is much more quicker. I don't know. I'm not a pharmacologist, or I don't do research in that area. But then you can think through how that hypothesis is coming along. Instead of saying drug A and drug B will be the same, and drug A will not be the same as drug B. So that's not your hypothesis. Your hypothesis essentially is looking at a mechanism and having a logical point as to why you believe this result should come, or if that result is not seen, then what could be the reason for the other thing. So that's your hypothesis. And if you have clear understanding of research and hypothesis, if that's clear in your head, then when you go down to write down your paper, you will be able to write it down much more easily. Okay, now we defined what is research, but why should we do research, right? I mean, why is anybody, you can just be sitting in your clinic and looking at 10, 20 patients per day, and you're very happy, you get a clinical gratification, your patients are happy, life is good. So why at all should we do research? Well, it turns out that for any field of study, and more so for science, that field can progress only if there is research. Okay, you cannot read a textbook that was written in 1900s, or in the year let's say 1965, because whatever tools and information that was available in 1965 is not the same in the year 2020. Many things have come. There is electron microscope, there is nanotechnology, a lot more has come. And therefore, the evidence that they generated in the year 1965 might actually be even wrong, right? So as we improve, as the human beings try to evolve and make progress and discover new things, we now stand upon those existing new things and try to build the knowledge further on. So for any field of study to progress, we absolutely have to do research, and this is no different for optometry also. So if we all of us who are listening here, if you're optometrists and if you care for this profession, at least hopefully some of you would join the research stream and try to make progress for this field of science. And I like this example because I think this is one of a very good example for an optometry research that it's like very widely known, because any research with eye, okay, in vision science or ophthalmology or optometry, you invariably will measure visual acuity, right? And the standard of care and the standard for clinical trials, the gold standard right now is your ETDRS chart, your early treatment diabetic retinopathy study. ETDRS chart was essentially developed completely based on the Bailey-Lowy chart. Okay, so Ian Bailey is an Australian optometrist who is now in University of California, Berkeley, in the US, and so he was the PI, or he's the supervisor, and Jane Lowy, who's after marriage, she's Jane Lowy Kitchen. So Jane Lowy was Bailey's master's student. Okay, so Bailey had an interest in low vision, and Jane Lowy wanted to do a master's project. So when Bailey and Lowy were looking at, what is the sort of like how do we measure visual acuity in low vision patients, they realized that the Snellen chart that they were using was terrible, because they really couldn't systematically sort of analyze or even capture what the patient had as visual acuity. So because they did not have right tools, they said, you know what, let's just develop a chart and put in some more logical progression for this. And that's how Bailey-Lowy chart came out. It was essentially Jane Lowy's master's project. So any of the student project, if it is carefully thought through and very systematically and scientifically done, can actually have the impact that a Bailey-Lowy chart had. So students should feel encouraged that, I'm just doing a student project. It may not be like that. Your project, if it's really valid, will have a much wider use. Okay, so we dealt quite a bit on what is research, why do we do research. So we are getting into what is research paper now, right? So it's not just about writing. The reason why we are writing is we want to publish. So we'll have to ask the question systematically, why do we want to publish? Okay, you're publishing because you want to disseminate the new knowledge that you have discovered. Okay, whatever that you have found, if you find it useful for your patients, you want many more people to do the same thing. And therefore you are trying to publish because you want to put out this information so that down the line in 10 years, there might be a student who's reading your paper and they would say that, oh, this is a good idea and I can probably do more and continue that work, right? So that's how we make the field progress. And the reason also we publish research papers is because once that paper, whatever findings is there, and when it becomes vetted with it, we collect all these research papers, we compile it, and that's how your textbooks are born. So the textbooks you're reading essentially is nothing but a compilation of several different research papers, right? And many a times we tell our students that if you really want to find out what is current knowledge, what is the current information, honestly you shouldn't be looking at textbooks, because textbooks are always outdated. Okay, they are good, books are excellent as a starting point for students to get knowledge, but remember that whatever is in the book may not be the current knowledge. So you would get information only from research paper, and that's why it's important to publish these research papers. So when I was given this topic and as I was preparing for this presentation, I thought to myself, let me see what happened to my PhD work that I did. Did it actually make its way into any textbook? So I finished my PhD in 2007 December, okay, and the paper came out in 2009 in the journal called Vision Research. So this is actually my PhD work, the influence of Vergence adaptation on open loop Vergence dynamics. This is my advisor, Dr. Nick Fogg. And Saujanya Gauri Shankaran features in as a second author. And the reason why she became a second author is because I finished in 2007 and I left for Schepens Eye Research Institute in 2008. And we were writing this paper. And so when we submitted the paper, the reviewer got back to us and they asked a lot of questions. And one of the questions actually required me to run another experiment to answer the reviewer's question. And since I was not physically present in Ohio State, so Saujanya was the other graduate student with Nick Fogg. So she helped me to run that experiment, and therefore she became a second author on this. So I found out, in fact, I just found out recently as I was preparing for this presentation that this work is in fact cited in this book. This is the Neurology of Eye Movements. This is actually the Holy Bible of eye movements. I have read this book, the earlier edition, during my PhD's time. I have read this book in their much earlier edition of Lee and Z. So Lee and Z's Neurology of Eye Movements would be one of the books that all the neuro-ophthalmologists would refer. I had referred this book in its earlier edition in my PhD work in 2009. So when Lee and Z brought out their next recent edition that came out in 2015, I was pleasantly surprised to see that my work has been cited in this book. But remember, so it says it is found inside this book in page 565. But remember, this citation, I'm sure, will only be a one line. Okay, so your textbooks will have a line written, and then there is a superscript of a number which says this is the reference for it. But that one line is somebody's PhD work. For me, it was 3 years, and with a master's, it's a complete 5 years. So my entire 5 years of my understanding of something actually becomes a one line in the textbook. Okay, so that is how research is. So to compile books by accumulating all that is there in research papers is a lot of effort. It's a lot of people's PhD work, master's work, and their lifetime work also. So remember also, this is 2015, right? So this book has come out in 2015 and this is 2009. So that's the time lag between when that information got into the book, which is why I said your books are actually outdated. And therefore you have to, if you want current information and new information, you always rely on research papers, not on Wikipedia, not from WhatsApp University, all these WhatsApp messages that will say this is safe, that this. No, you need to go to Scholar, you need to go to PubMed, and that is where you get authentic information from journals that are peer reviewed and of high reputation. So that brings us to this question, where to publish? Say an absolute no, big no to predatory journals. There are a whole, this has become such a obnoxious business model now, where authors can pay money and they can write whatever junk that they want to write, and they can cushion up, build up their CV. Their resume can be built by saying, oh, I've published like 10 papers or 20 paper, and all these journals are completely, meaningless. In an established academia circle, in a established research place, and amidst established researchers and people who are very serious into academia, they will never respect you if you publish your work in predatory journals. So the website I have given here gives you a list of predatory journals. These days, increasingly, we get emails saying that, oh, we want you to be a guest editor. Please submit your paper. We are bringing out a special issue. We looked at your work that was published in Nature Eye, and we are interested in this. Can you please write? We get these emails all the time. I'm not the only one. I'm sure whoever is into publishing would are getting these emails, and without a blink of an eye, I delete off all these emails. Okay, always say no to predatory journals. Don't ever get into that rut. So then how do you know which are the journals to publish? You can actually again do a Google search, and you can say what are the top eye journals. And I said what are the top optometry journals, and these are the list top 5 that came out. If you say what are the top eye journals, it will combine you with both ophthalmology and optometry and vision science. So it's a whole compendium of list of journals. If you're purely looking at optometry, then your ophthalmic and physiological optics, which is the Society Journal for Optometrist in UK. Okay, so that's the British Optometrist official publication is the Ophthalmic and Physiological Optics, and this journal ranks higher for optometry, but amidst the list of all the eye journals, its rank is number 13. Okay, the number one for eye journals is Progress in Retinal Research. You can do this in Google search and you'll get this list. I'm not talking about contact lens and anterior eye because that's a very specific topic, but in a general optometry term, Optometry and Vision Science is the official journal for the American Academy of Optometry. Your Journal of Optometry is the official publication for Spain, and your Clinical and Experimental Optometry is the official journal for Australia. Now, a long time back, one of my friends, and who's also into all the legal policies and all of that for optometry, she was suggesting that maybe we should start an optometry journal for India. And I sort of said, maybe it's too early to start, because I said we need to compete with these guys. We need to compete internationally. We need to have very established researchers who are acclaimed internationally. Once when we make a solid force of such researchers, then it will be the time to start a journal. That was my personal opinion. I'm not sure what others feel or think about it, but I think be it Nepal or India, if you guys are saying, oh, let's start a journal, remember that first of all, the people who are going to start the journal should absolutely have complete knowledge of what is research, why are we publishing, and then only then we can actually hold the standards high. Otherwise, what will happen is we get a very bad reputation. People will say, oh, this journal is pseudoscience, I don't believe it, it's poorly written, it's not a peer reviewed journal, oh, it's one of those predatory journals, right? So it's very important to first establish ourselves and compete in the international arena, and then we all can go local. Okay, so much on research and paper, and now we get to writing, right? Now, you will be disappointed to hear this, but there's no shortcut. I cannot, in a 40 minutes of presentation, I cannot promise and say after you hear my lecture you will be able to go and sit in your house and write a paper just like that, and overnight you can produce a paper. No, that's not going to happen. There is no shortcut. You just have to practice, practice, practice. And the way you practice writing is you write anything and everything. Okay, it doesn't have to be necessarily your research itself. It can be simply like you take up a topic, say I want to summarize what's the dry eye prevalence in Nepal, and you could do a literature search, write a short essay. Or you can say I want to write an essay about what's this future scope for optometrists. Anything. Okay, the more you write, the more your English would improve. And if you can get feedback or that'll be very good. And these days there are software that are there, Grammarly and all of that. You can do grammar check, and once you start writing, it'll help you to sort of refine your language. And once you're able to get into that refining mode, you can write better. But while I say practice, practice, and practice, please don't practice your mistakes. Okay, if you're going to repeatedly write with the wrong spelling, you're only reinforcing the wrong spelling. So you need to absolutely get a feedback from somebody whom you consider as a mentor. So if you guys have a newsletter that you're bringing out, then proofread it, get feedback from your peers or your friends. If you're doing a project with a supervisor, then obviously your supervisor will be the mentor who is going to fix sort of all these mistakes that you're making. But don't practice it on your own. So you need to know where your mistakes are, and we all need to learn from our mistakes. As I said earlier, the more you read, and it's not just like, oh, I'm going to read this and then quickly read the abstract and I'm done reading, I know what this paper said. It's not about that. When you're reading research papers, you need to see what's the style in which this author has written. Okay, I have found very like some authors who have had impactful writing. One of my colleague, Dr. Pavan Varkicharla, his postdoc mentor in Singapore Eye Research Institute, Dr. Saw, she had written a beautiful paper, I think in OPO, ophthalmic and physiological optics. I was extremely impressed in that style in which she had written. So just don't read the lines for the literal meaning of it. Read and see what is the style in which this author is writing, but do not copy that. Okay, don't write that exact. Instead of, they had written that, okay, in Singapore the prevalence of myopia is found, and then take out Singapore and put in India the prevalence, and have that exact same sentence, except that you have changed the country name. Don't do that. That will be called plagiarism. You'll be flagged, and this is a serious ethical mistake. Okay, so plagiarism means you're copying somebody else's work and you're trying to write it as if you are the one who generated that sentence. Okay, even if I have published a paper, I cannot write the same sentence. Even though I am the one who wrote it in the earlier paper, I cannot copy the very same sentence into my next paper. That will be called self plagiarism, and that is not allowed. And these days there are a lot of software that are actually that will help you and say how much of a plagiarism content is there. So one of the things is, while you're reading all these papers and trying to understand, when you go on to write a paper, just close your mind and start writing in your own words. We call it the mental dump, and I will give you some examples for it. I have a manuscript plan, okay, and this I learned it from my postdoctoral mentor, Professor Elipelli, and he's a fantastic researcher, and he doesn't have a PhD. Okay, but everyone who works for Professor Elipelli has a PhD, including a secretary who books his flight tickets. And I always love to say this. So you don't honestly need a PhD. You only have to have the right acumen of a researcher. Okay, so don't think that only if I have a PhD I can write a research paper. Not really. But you need to have the skills for how to do the research, how to read papers, how to analyze your data, and how to write. All of that, if you accumulate all of those skills, then you can become an established researcher, like how Professor Elipelli became an established researcher. He's extremely well respected, and he writes excellent. He does excellent work, original ideas, good hypothesis, and he publishes a lot. He has an incredible lab in Schepens in Harvard. He is associated with Harvard Medical School. He's the professor in ophthalmology there, and he's done his engineering and an OD degree. There is no PhD. There is no. He's not a medical doctor. Okay, but he's very well respected. And it is from Ellie that I learned about actually starting a manuscript plan. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen, my desktop. Can you still see my desktop? Asmita, can you confirm for me?
Yes, ma'am, we can see it. Yes.
Okay, all right. So I'll just go over, and this is the tips that I was talking about. Okay, so I'm actually sharing you with with all of you my desktop. So that's me. That's projects. Okay, and this is some of the work I did at Schepens Eye Research Institute. I'm going to pick up a paper that we published in Ophthalmic and Physiological Optics, the #1 ranked optometry journal, right? And so this is the bitemporal hemianopia paper, all right? And I'll show you my very first version of it, okay? So one of the things, the reason I'm taking you through my desktop and showing you all these folders is before you do research, you want to organize yourself, okay? So if you see, I have the project name, okay? That's the folder name, is the project name. Under that, I have manuscripts, I have figures, I have relevant papers, which are all the, journal articles. And then there are AAO is the American Academy of Optometry conference. So we made a poster there and we presented this paper in that conference. But this is the manuscript, okay? And if you see in my manuscript, I have several documents, and here I have something called old versions. So before the full paper got published, and I will show you how the full paper looks. But before you see that, you need to see how was the very first draft originated, okay? And if you see these different versions of my papers, you see that they are all dated with different dates, right? So it almost started in June 13, and then the final paper that got published came out in January 2014. So I said doing research, writing paper is a long process. You need to have a lot of patience and perseverance to do this, okay? So let's look at the old version. I think I will have it already opened up, and this is the one, and you guys can see my Word document, I hope. If not, please give a shout out. So this is the manuscript plan, the very first thing we wrote, okay? So our working title, okay, it's working title, not the final title. We said Rehabilitation for Bitemporal Hemianopia. I left the authors blank, okay? And so it's in track changes. So wherever there are letters that are written in an orangish yellow sort of font, that's Professor Eli Pelli giving me feedback, right? So he said this is the author order, okay? So Eli is first, I am second. The reason why Eli is first and I am second, even though I did all the work, I actually wrote the manuscript. Of course, Eli reviewed it, revised it. The reason why he needs to be the first author on this paper is because it was his idea. Okay, I did not suggest this. It was not my original idea, and therefore he becomes the first author and he becomes the corresponding author on this, and I was the second author on this. Okay. And so what is the target journal? And we were saying, okay, so Eli said, not sure about this. We may be able to get it in a higher ranking journal. We may not, but it is worth trying. OVS, Optometry and Vision Science. They have a special issue deadline. And that's the deadline. It's always a good idea to keep a deadline in mind. So that way you can work towards the deadline. Okay. All right. So we have identified a title. We know the author order. What's the target journal? The reason why you need to know the target journal is if you're submitting it to a very hardcore eye-related journal, then your style of writing will not explain all the basic concepts. You will already assume that the readership knows all these things. You don't have to say what is temporal, what is hemianopia. I mean, people get it. So in one line, you can explain it. But if I'm going to choose a target, like say, for example, PLOS One, or a very general journal like Lancet, which is the highest ranking medical journal, or New England Journal of Medicine, another higher ranking medical journal. And that's a complete general medical journal. Over there, they can have readers who are neurologists, who are psychologists, who are into pediatrics. And so for them, I'll have to write the whole paper in a very general style. So it's important that you know where your target journal is, okay? And then you're putting the other content, and this is the thing that you write. What's the main message we want to say? Okay, so I had written something like rehabilitation options for bitemporal hemianopia, namely prisms and use of stereotyposcope. And then Eli has expanded it to say that bitemporal hemianopia is mostly a binocular problem rather than a field loss problem, and only post fixation blindness is okay. So I'm not going to get into the science of this, okay, but the point is both the authors are agreeing upon what is the main message, what's the new idea, okay, what's the original idea you're trying to say in this paper. In this paper, the original idea is about this stereotyposcope, okay. All right, so we will have to have an abstract, we will have to have an introduction. And look how this paper, this is the very raw structure, the skeletal structure of the very first draft. I have not written anything, right? All that is in black are things that I have written. So I am giving essentially a skeletal outline of how we want to expand these topics. So brief intro, and then explain midline stereopsis, blah, blah, then the methods. I'm just putting it in bullet points essentially. And then we are saying, okay, this will be our results, this will be our discussion, and then what's the acknowledgement, funding, the sources, and then references, right? So this is the very first draft that I have written for this paper. Okay, so I'll close this, right? And if I go back to this, you will see that there are a lot of versions here. Okay, so this is evolving as it comes up. There is more added and more added, and so there is an old version here, and then where did we submit? This is what we finally submitted, right? We submitted this on 4th September 2013. We started in June. Now look at the final version. Okay, you see the title is changed now, right? It says bitemporal hemianopia. It's unique binocular complexities and a novel remedy. It looks more fancy and it looks more cleaner. This is the running title, corresponding author, all of this. And this is the final cut of the paper that I'm showing you. That's the abstract, keywords, and then you have your introduction, lot more written, and there is a nice figure that's there. It talks about how somebody is going to perceive it. Again, this presentation is not meant to go into the science of things, but to show you that it took that long of a time to study all these papers that are there. It's very important when you're writing a paper and citing a paper. You should have absolutely read all these papers thoroughly. Okay, not just read the abstract and then cite the paper. And sometimes I fall off the grid and I don't do that, but that's a mistake. Okay, so that's the final version that we submitted. And then we submitted it. So it comes out to OPO. I was telling you, this is the journal for the British people, right? The Society Journal for the British guys. So ophthalmic and physiological. So when you go to the submission site of so when you go to any of these journals and you say that you want to say for author, there will be a drop down menu. If we have time, I will show you that. And so we can go into that, and when you submit, that system itself will generate the PDF for you. Okay, so it will generate the PDF, and this is the PDF that goes to the reviewers. Okay, the ones who are going to anonymously review your work. Okay, and then it will come back to revisions, and then you will have to answer those revisions. Okay, so here is the responses. So the reviewers, let's look at this, because this is all a part of the writing process itself. We have written, we thank the editors and reviewers for their comments. We have addressed each of their comments italicized below. Changes in the manuscript are highlighted, blah, blah. And all right, so general comments. In some ways, this paper tries to do too much. It tests a hypothesis. Remember the word hypothesis? We talked about it. Okay, with a very nice modification of standard. So we had an hypothesis in this paper, right? But then the reviewers had some concerns, and so this is what is italicized are the reviewers comments, and so then we answer that. And yeah, okay, so it goes on. And so there are usually 2 reviewers. Sometimes you can get 3 reviewers, and so we'll have to answer every reviewer's comments, editor's comments. It's quite a long process. It can sometimes be a painful process too. And then when everything is accepted, again they review it and all of that, and then finally you get a proof. And so the paper looks something like this. Okay, so it comes out in the print. In fact, today there is a paper that me and my colleague Dr. Shrikant Bharadwaj submitted to IOVS, and the proof for that came, and I in fact made this submission today. So this is what you're going to see is something you will see in IOVS in maybe after 3-4 months. It will come out in the journal. But when the whole process of writing is a long drawn process. It's not like I can write a paper and get it published in 1 month. It doesn't happen that way. It's a long drawn process. Okay. All right, so that's the example to go over the manuscript plan. You will not immediately write an entire full paper in 1 day, in one shot. It's a slow step-by-step process, incremental changes, reading more papers, assimilating that information, and being able to verbalize and write it in a very easy to understand way. Many people think that writing means we'll have to put in fancy words and jargons, and vocabulary should be, very fancy sounding and all that. Not at all needed. Simple, plain English, but in a more compact sentence. One of the major mistakes people do with writing is they try to write a long sentence, like it would have started in the first line and the sentence would have end in the fourth or the fifth line, and they would have written like, oh, myopia is common in India, and it is also found that it is more common in people who are having nutritional deficiency, and also researchers of, and then they will put all these conjunctions and three four, so they make it as a compound sentence. What should have been broken down as three four simple sentences will be made as one compound big sentence, and that's not good style of writing. Again, you can learn a lot about style of writing, and there are a lot of resources out in the internet, and I don't have to do that. You guys can look at it. So we are coming to the final portion on the ethics part, and this is very, very important. One of the things that Professor Elipelli told me is, he told me two things. He said one thing is, when you go back to India, don't start publishing papers that say, oh, in India we found this, in India we did that, so try to avoid that. We are not interested to find out what is in one country. That's never new. And then he also said the biggest contribution you can do to science is by not publishing wrong science. And this, I think I started to remember what he said in this when this recent example came in this blog for Better Science. So let's read this. It says the two highest ranking international medical journals. Remember, I mentioned you these journals, New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, retracted yesterday simultaneously two papers on COVID-19. The reason is obvious. There is a fraud committed by the co-author Sapan Desai, a Chicago-based surgeon and businessman whose analytics company Surgisphere claimed to have stored clinical data from thousands of patients of hundreds of hospitals all over the world, which was apparently it was all made up. And these papers actually had a couple of authors from Harvard Medical School. Okay, so many a times people just go by the name of the institute and they would just accept that paper and believe in it. I have noticed that when I was in the US, I never had in a single paper rejected, and I had published almost 12 papers or 13 papers. But the moment when I came to India, and the very first submission that I made, that was probably rejected 12 times. Okay, so and I was the same person who wrote those papers in the US, and I was here in India, and I'm still the same person writing it. And so people become very extremely critical, and especially with predatory journals, and it has very bad name, especially for countries like India and China. People abroad don't trust anything that comes out of our country, which is why I was stressing and emphasizing so much to say that we really have to be very hold up that and say no to predatory journals, because we bring a lot of bad name to the entire country and to our profession. Okay, so in that blog, they said scientific publishing is broken and journal editors are either crooks or incompetents, all suffering from media obsession. Elite scientists don't care about anything other than their own academic elite status, and the industry money is flowing into their pockets. Hopefully, COVID-19 might expose and end this farce. There is a lot of ethics, so you really have to be, follow these ethics. You cannot give an undeserved authorship, because that's also a form of research misconduct in itself. I recently had a colleague who was working in another place. She called and said that she had done the whole work. It was her idea, but then she was given the third position. She was the third author in the paper, and because the senior person had to be the first author. And these are all very unethical practices. Okay, there are guidelines for publishing. ICMJE authorship criteria actually lists you the publishing guidelines. I hope you can see this. This is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and it talks about who is an author, okay, and what should be their role. And I'll just quickly say this alone, is to say that substantial contribution and conception or design of the work. This is where the idea comes in, right? Conception of the idea and design of the work, acquisition, analysis, interpretation of the data work, and drafting the work or revising it critically, and important intellectual content, not proofreading for grammar, and final approval of the version to be published. Only if you satisfy all these three conditions, you become an author. Okay. And again, agreement to be accountable. And the reason why people put this agreeable to be accountable is because the example that I showed in this, when the authors had to retract the paper, was very shameful. I mean, when they were contacted, they said, oh, we didn't know. Okay, so you're not accountable then, and therefore you're failed in your authorship criteria. All right, so recapping the learning objectives. So I hope we now have some understanding for what is it to do research, why we do research, why we write research papers. I hope you got some practical tips for writing papers, and importantly, you understand the ethics for publishing the research paper. It requires quite a lot of self-discipline in doing this, and therefore I will leave you with this quotation, which obviously was not told by Buddha. You have mastered the selfie, now you need to master the self. Okay, and whenever you take things from somewhere else which is not originally created by you, you need to give the acknowledgement for it. So I have said I have taken this from the Google images. So I thank you for your attention, and I am sure that I have exceeded my time. I actually had few more examples, then I decided I will not go over that because we need to give time for discussion. So I shall stop sharing and I will hand it back over to the moderators.
Okay, Dr. Premnandhini. It was very informative actually. So let me check if there is any question. We'll go through the discussion session. Till now, I didn't see any question.
All right.
So we'll just wait for a while.
All right.
So in the meantime, I just have question for you.
Yeah.
Like fresh batch like us, they will be like so much motivating. They want to go for publishing paper, and they keep on writing, but they lose hope. In the middle, they just change their track. So since last experience, what do you suggest an individual should have for publishing journal?
Okay, so for students, for beginners, right? The ones who are doing very hardcore, very strong hypothesis driven studies, right? I said research means original idea, discovering new and all that. And maybe I have intimidated this crowd by putting all that information. Okay. Now that is if you are a scientist and you're doing research, and research means you're generating new ideas, new knowledge. Okay. But for clinicians, okay, the one advantage that clinical people have is they can write case reports. Okay. Now, for you to first start practicing writing case reports, you can choose any simple case and write a case report. Okay. And you can read papers on case reports. You can see what is the style in which it is written. And you can write about a patient whom you have seen, and then you write a case report on that. Okay. So, for example, Optometry Council of India, they give continuous education credit points. All right. So, one of the things that they require people is they can get credit points if they actually write case reports. Not even, it doesn't journal. They simply write their own case reports of the patients that they have seen. So it could be a case where somebody walked in with keratoconus and they have fit a contact lens, they got the nice 3-point touch, and so they describe that, how many trials they did, blah, blah. So case report, starting with writing a case report is actually a good start, I would say. And that's the advantage we have for clinical people, okay? For researchers and sometimes for other clinicians, I've heard people say, write a review article, meaning that, okay, I'm going to look at amblyopia. I'm going to look at what's new in amblyopia. So the question that you asked me before we started this meeting is, can adults improve? Can adults with amblyopia improve? Okay, so you can say, oh, let me do a review of literature. Okay, and there are patients who are contacting you, asking you this information. Instead of you talking to them over the phone saying, yeah, there are some studies and they have shown this, what you could then do is, if you're repeatedly asked this question, you can actually read some papers, assimilate that information, and you can say, here is a review of literature for whatever is the present treatment modality for adult amblyopes, right? And that review of literature is a good starting point for you to write. And as I said, it requires practice, but you also have to actually have good mentorship. See, I had written papers even before I got into graduate school. And we had an in-house journal in Shankar Nethralaya called Insight, and I had written an article for that. So that was a good starting point. Of course, all of us in most of the optometry programs, we do projects and students write their project reports. So that's a good starting point. And some of our PGD students have written project reports, and they are doing a great job, and we are trying to convert it into papers. Okay, so actually having a good mentor really helps you. So if somebody is really interested, you should probably, and if you don't have a good mentor, just read more papers and see what's the style in which they are writing, and go ahead and submit it to a journal. Even if it gets rejected, it's okay, because I've got a lot of rejections. Okay, and the good thing is, if you don't have a mentor, okay, but you submit it to a journal, the journal will have reviewers who will give comments for you. They are your mentors. You understood? So in a way, even if your paper is getting rejected, the reviewer is saying, oh, the author has written like this, but this is wrong, or the author has written like this and this is confusing. So the reviewers are like your mentors who are giving you that feedback. So don't feel dejected or disappointed if you get a rejection, because that reviewer is your anonymous mentor actually. So if at all, if you're in an institute where you're on your own and you don't have a mentor, it's okay, go ahead and submit. You will still get some reviews.
Okay. So we have one question, doctor. Like, how different is it to write for social science, being as an optometrist?
I don't well I don't know what they mean by to write for social sciences. Are they thinking that it is like a community, of a social cause, or um, so I'm not sure in which angle they are asking this, but since they asked, okay, I will share a paper that I actually wrote that perhaps add that angle on that. Okay, and I'll tell you what paper I wrote. Okay, so this is where would that be? Okay, well, I wrote a paper for current science. Okay, and it was on a vision screening that I did for people who were survivors of Bhopal gas disaster. Okay, I may not find that folder because I'll just go here and say Bhopal. Okay, we'll see what we get. Okay, you guys can see my screen, right?
Yeah, doctor, we can see.
Okay, and okay, so it gives me a lot more. So I'll say current science is the journal. Current science. Okay. By the way, current science is actually the official publication for Indian National Academy of Sciences. Okay, this journal is India's official publication for their Academy of Sciences. Okay, this journal was started by Professor C.V. Raman. You all know C.V. Raman, right? So he's the one who started it, and this is a general journal. Okay, and it, as you can see, it gives you plant sciences and so many things, right? Is this paper here? Here. Okay, yeah, you can see here. So it says research communications. So as an optometrist, I have written a paper that also had a social science angle to it. It is vision screening results in a cohort of Bhopal gas disaster survivors. Okay, so your strength is optometry. You can do vision testing and all of that. Okay, now what's new in this paper? Okay, remember we had an hypothesis. I sort of said, oh, when you're publishing, it has to be new. What was new that we were trying to convey in this paper is Bhopal gas disaster happened in 1983. Okay, and when the disaster happened, people from all over the world came to study and see what are all the health effects of people. And there was a group from London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and those guys came and they collected data and published a paper in Lancet. Remember, I said Lancet is the highest ranking journal, and they published a paper in Lancet saying what are all the common eye symptoms that these survivors were having. Okay, and it had been almost more than 30 years or so, or 27 years or so, and nobody really went back and looked at these survivors and said, are they still having the same symptoms that they had before? So we wanted to know what's the long term effect. Okay, and that's why we did the screening. So it was not just that, oh, we went and did that, but we said, what is the problem that these people still face, and are they having access to proper eye care? So there was a social science aspect to it, and we, at the same time, we were also able to say, what is, okay, Lancet published that paper, but what's happening now? Okay, and when I wrote this paper, I actually submitted it to Lancet. Okay, and Lancet, usually that's a high ranking journal. Okay, if you submit it today, maybe in next 24 hours you will get a rejection. Okay, but Lancet actually took, I think, about a month, and then they said, we think this article is best suited in another journal. Okay, because it's a very sort of like a very provocative article too, because we were saying that not enough was done for these guys, and they didn't want to publish it. But that's okay, it got rejected in Lancet, which is fine. But what Lancet did instead is, after they rejected our paper, within a month or so, they actually wrote an editorial on Bhopal. Okay, and they said what is happening there. So we brought attention to that place by merely submitting an article and reminding them of their memory of this great tragedy. Okay, so that I suppose answers the social science question.
Yeah, probably that will give the idea for Rekha ma'am. So she also added like social science is, for example, social science is one which caters to other professional like special education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could again bring in, so for special education you can say what are the visual needs that a child needs to have, ergonomic setup in order for the special educators to be able to communicate with the child. So you can look at what are the visual needs in a scenario like that. There are so many, see, there are actually enough and plenty of ideas out there. Somebody has to just put their mind into it, and they can know what to study.
Okay, so hopefully she got her answer. Now we have next question like for the paper to be credible, what should be the sample size? Is qualitative research valued too?
uh, your sample size, there are formulae, and there are software that will calculate the sample size. Okay, so in certain studies, if you have calculated the sample size, you will know that, okay, I only require 20 people, and that is good enough. If you're looking at an epidemiological study, large scale public eye health studies, one of our colleagues here, Dr. Srinivas Marmamulla, is involved in such studies, and his sample size is 3,000, 4,000, like that. If I say that I have done a study on 100 people, he will say that's a small sample size. But if I ask my psychophysicist colleagues here, they would say sample size of 5 is enough for us. So more than asking what should be the sample size, the question should be what is the study's actual research question. Okay, and depending on that, you will decide what the sample size is. And to say that is qualitative research valued too, see, any research is research as long as we follow the research ethics and apply strict scientific rigor. Okay, whether you are quantifying something, or I would suppose qualitative research, for example, is quality of life studies, right? I mean, those are incredibly valuable because many of the people who are writing for funding agency would say, oh, people with keratoconus are having a poor quality of life, and this is what they experience. People having dry eye have poor quality of life. And they would use all these examples of other researchers' work who have done qualitative studies. And they would then say, okay, we are going to now therefore measure tear film thickness using this instrument, right? And so there is nothing like one is better than the other. Okay, the reason I stressed upon hypothesis and discovering something new is that if I have a scientific study, I can have it as hypothesis driven. If you're doing a quality of life study, say for example the keratoconus example or the dry eye example that I gave, the hypothesis there is you expect this group to have a poor quality, much more poorer quality of life because they are women, older, and therefore menopause is affecting them more. So you still have some hypothesis that you can bring in, but every research done with good rigor is always valuable.
Okay. So we have next question like, is it is it a good idea for a PhD or the master students to start a research with a review article?
Um, any student, whether they are doing a master's or a PhD, or if it is even their own student project, it is always a good idea to start writing. Okay, whether you're writing a review article or not. Most of the time for masters and PhD student, given that you're already expected to write your literature review, that in a way is your review article. Now, if you have followed proper systematic review, you have followed the guidelines for how to do that systematic review, then you can by all means go ahead and try to publish that. Okay. Some of the times in very high ranking journals, say for example JAMA Ophthalmology, they will ask you what kind of a study is this. Is this a case report? Is this a case series? Is this a case control study? Is this a randomized clinical trial? Is this a systematic review? Is it a meta-analysis? Okay. Now for each of that study, type of study, and including qualitative studies, they have guidelines. Okay. So if you go to the journal website, look at the guidelines first, even before you start your project. That will tell you exactly what are all the points that the journal is looking for. Okay. What is the sample size? What's the study design? All of that. Once when you start looking at the guidelines, you can actually copy and keep a format of that and start writing your article based on those guidelines. So that itself will enable you to start writing the paper.
Okay, so we have this much questions so far. Let me check once. Okay, so if you have any question, you can just write it down. And I hope this answers your funny question, hopefully. Now we have only this much question. We'll wait just for, okay, I got it. Next question as well. And the question is how to target a journal for publishing a paper when there are many journals for a specific field?
Yes. So there are many journals, and I showed you the list of journals also, right? So first, every journal, if you go to their webpage, so let's see, I'll probably try sharing my screen again. So let's take a real-time example, right? Okay, so let's go to optometry and vision science, right? Okay. I hope you guys can see my screen. Okay, so I just click that link. It takes me to their journal. Okay. Over here, you will see there is something called journal info. Okay. So let's click on that about the journal. What is this journal saying? Okay. So it says optometry and vision science is the most authoritative source for current developments in optometry, physiological optics, and vision science. This frequently cited monthly scientific journal has served primary eye care practitioners for more than 75 years, promoting vital interdisciplinary exchange among optometrists and vision scientists worldwide. Okay. Sometimes in here, if you go to these journals, some of the journals will have something called as aim and scope. Okay. Let's try another journal. Let's try Eye journal. Okay. About the journal. Okay. Here you see aims and scope. Okay. Here, aim and scope. Eye is the journal name. Okay. It's a Nature's publication. Eye seeks to provide the international practicing ophthalmologist. Okay, by the way, Eye is the official journal for the Royal College of Ophthalmologists. So this is also a UK-based journal, and it is for the Royal College of Ophthalmologists. And therefore, their aim and scope is to provide international practicing ophthalmologists with high-quality articles of academic rigor on the latest global clinical and lab-based research. Its core aim is to advance science and practice of ophthalmology with the latest clinical. So each of this tells you who is their target audience. Okay, while it's principally aimed at practicing clinicians, the journal contains material of interest to a wider readership that includes optometrists, orthoptists, other healthcare professionals, research workers, right? So yeah, it's here it says it's the official journal of the Royal College of Ophthalmologists. Okay, so what are they interested in? They are interested in external eye disease, orbital, blah, blah, pediatric ophthalmology. Okay, and it tells you what's their journal metrics, what's their impact factor, all of this. So before you decide which journal you want to publish, you need to first decide what's the main message that you're trying to give. Okay, and who is the target audience to whom you want to give. Say, for example, why did we choose to publish Bhopal paper in Current Science? Current Science is the National Academy of Science in India. That is also the journal that all the ministers and what do you say, policy makers in the government will look at. So we wanted the government's attention for Bhopal, right? If I publish Bhopal in optometry and vision science, probably the government will not pick up. Okay, so you need to actually have a target journal where you want to put it depending on your audience. I went for Lancet because Lancet has much wider impact factor. It's like the #1 ranked medical journal. If you can get through in Lancet, you can make big news in the media. We actually wanted media attention for our paper. Okay, that is why I chose there. Now, I published a paper in Eye. Okay, and I will show you that. This is a paper that got published in Eye, and this paper is on near vision in individuals with Down syndrome, a vision screening study. The reason why we published this paper in Eye is because, for one, we wanted to have a wider outreach both to ophthalmologists and optometrists. And what we said in this paper was, just because a child can read N6 at a closer distance will not mean that the child is having adequate amplitude of accommodation. The one thing I really like in Eye, this journal, is this journal's writing style will be, in the end, they will ask you to give a summary. Okay. Let me slowly scroll. Okay. In the summary, you're supposed to write what was known before and what is this study adding to this literature. Okay, so the journal makes you write this. So we said what was known is individuals with Down syndrome will have eye lag of accommodation. We know that if somebody is holding things closer at a closer viewing distance, we know that it will indicate they have good accommodation, particularly in children. And we know that if we measure near visual acuity, measurement of near visual acuity is generally considered for prescribing near vision spectacles. This is what we do with presbyopes all the time. All this we knew. So what is new this study is adding? This study is saying that if you have good near visual acuity and reading at closer distance, it will not always indicate that you have adequate amplitude of accommodation. And therefore, accommodative accuracy should be checked even if individuals with Down syndrome have good near visual acuity. Okay, so just because a child read N6 at a closer distance doesn't mean that they can accommodate adequately. So children with Down syndrome, many of them actually require bifocal spectacles. I don't know how many of you in this audience know that. And we wanted to create that awareness amidst a general eye care professional. So we chose to go with this journal. So where you want to publish really depends on who your target audience is. What is the message you want to educate? See, you have discovered something new. You want to disseminate that information. You're going to have an impactful dissemination only if you target the right audience.
Okay, so I think that probably answer your question. Now we have next question, like, can one still do a case control research if one has an institution which does not have an institutional review board? How can one go about?
So you have to find an institute that has an IRB, Institutional Review Board. Okay, so at LV Prasad Eye Institute, we have our own IRB, but we also serve as the IRB committee for several other institutes. So there are doctors who come from other hospitals and they don't have their own IRB. So they put their research proposal and our IRB committee reviews it for them and they can give an approval. You cannot publish a paper without institutional review board's approval, and you will have to have an informed consent, okay, signed. So it becomes very tricky. And what happened for us when we published the Bhopal paper is we did not have an IRB committee. And the time when I was doing the Bhopal study, I had just come out of Schepens Eye Research Institute. I was yet to join in LV Prasad. So I was there by myself. I was not actually associated with any institute. And so we did not have an IRB, but there was a management in the clinic where we were doing the study, Sambhavna Clinic. So we asked the Sambhavna Clinic's managing people to give approval for our research. And many of the journals, actually, Lancet, of course, rejected it. We tried another eye journal, and they were not very happy with the fact that we didn't have IRB approval, and they rejected our paper for that reason. Current Science didn't bother much, but we did put a statement to say that we didn't have IRB and we got the approval from the managing trustee. So do not start any project without having these systems in place, because what will happen is you will then write the whole paper and then you will realize you cannot submit it anywhere. And some of the institutes that will do the IRB might charge you for giving that review. So that's the other thing. So these things should be in place. Without that, you will not be able to do it.
Probably this is your answer, Flavia. So we have next question, like, how do we calculate sample size for a hypothesis, which quantifies a number, measure, or quality in a rare disease? You understand, doctor?
Yeah. I understood the question. I also understand because I'm also looking at the chat window, so I can read the question. So the thing is, yes, if you do, so usually the sample size is calculated based on previous literature, right? So some studies would have done this and they would say that, oh, our limitation is, or we had a small sample size and maybe that is why we didn't find a significant difference. So then what you can do is you can see what is the difference, that estimated difference that they are looking for. You can use that formula. You can use that parameter for your formula, and you can look at the standard deviation that the previous literature had established, and you can put that into your calculation, and then you can generate a sample size. Now, the person who is asking this question is asking that if you do not have any such precedents, right, then what would you do? How will you do the sample size calculation? Now, one way to do it is, especially for rare conditions, if something is very rare, then your sample size obviously has to be more, because if 1 in 10 people are having that condition, then I only need like 100 people and then I can get 10 of them, right? Or if 5 people out of 10 are having, then with a small sample size I get a lot of my cases. But if it's going to be a rare condition, then I have to increase the sample size. So depending on the prevalence of that condition, you'll have to probably increase your sample size 3 times more than that in order for you to be able to catch it. Okay, so there are I suppose there are guidelines for how you can choose the sample size for this. And again, if something is very rare, and say for example the spasm paper that we wrote, accommodative or spasm of near reflex is a rare condition. They are not going to get very many. So instead of focusing it as a sample size, you get whatever you get, and you say in the time period that we collected the data, this is how many people we have examined, and therefore the prevalence of, and your study might be the first study to give that prevalence for the people, and people are okay with that. So not every strict study requires a sample size. Say for example, if you're going to do myopia study or dry eye, obviously sample size becomes an issue because these are all very well established literature. But for conditions that are rare, you can be forgiven. And in fact, in your paper, you can say, given that we did not have a precedence to this, we did not do a sample size collection, but we looked at this presenting condition in this time period of 2 years or whatever, 3 years. And you can go with whatever that sample size is.
Okay, so like Rekha ma'am is asking for your suggestion to good book or resource for research methodology.
Okay, honestly speaking, remember I was telling you that I am talking out of my experience, and you can Google and find out books, right? So I never read any research methodology book. Okay. Instead, because I was in a graduate program, I went through a program and they had research methodology as a part of their course structure. Okay. And that is how I learned my research methodology. And some of the statistics book we referred were some basic statistics, not necessarily for clinicians. I know that people who are into evidence-based practice, they follow the book by David Sacke, I think. And that also talks about some statistics and all of that. So that might be one good book. And I cannot think of, as I said, I have not honestly, all my learning has come through coursework. That is how I have learnt it. So you're probably better off more with hands-on and taking courses, because it's like writing again. Okay, somebody can say, can you suggest a good book for writing? You can read books, but you will not be able to do it till you sit and write. Okay, research methodology is along those lines. Unless you sit, collect data, and you sit down in front of the Excel sheet and start analyzing it, you will not be able to really learn it. It might give you guidelines, but your practical experience is the good book.
Okay, so that's all question we have so far. So let me check once again if there is any. Otherwise, we will wrap up for today.
Look at, as I said, the one other point is look at journal websites, because they give you the recommendation for what all should be in the paper. And that by itself is a good methodology guideline. So let me see if I can share my screen one more time. I'm going to take you to JAMA Ophthalmology, and it has instructions for authors. And if you look at JAMA, right, requirements for reporting, blah blah. Yeah, look at this. So it says clinical trial and meta-analysis. So this is your different types of studies, right? And it says follow the equator reporting guidelines. Okay, so if you look at the guidelines, and it will say, okay, if you are doing an original trial protocol, what should be that consort flow diagram. So in a way, this is sort of setting it up for you to say what's the exactly what all is expected in that, right? Look at this. This is how you're supposed to do a randomized clinical trial. Okay, assessed for eligibility, how many did you exclude, and then you randomized, and then how many got assigned to this. So it's actually giving you the guidelines, reporting, meta-analysis. See, so you do have all these guidelines, checklist. So read all that, and that is every step over here will tell you how to do the research. So that's your research methodology in a way. Okay.
We have more question. Like, okay. There is one question. Some basic rules for on sample size star estimation are level of significance. It is typically taken as 5%. The sample size increases as level of significance decreases. Okay, so
what's the question?
I
think
giving
Ishwar is
answer.
giving guidelines for somebody who asked what is sample size.
Okay.
So what Ishwar is saying, for the person who asked sample sizes, you can determine it by fixing the level of significance, and usually that's at 5%. That's your alpha value, and the power is the beta value is fixed at 80%, and this is all the equations that you put in for calculating the sample size.
Okay. Actually, this was answer, but I took it as a question. Next is from Susma. Data collection related to humans have been stopped because of COVID situation. Do you have any thought on how do we utilize this time for research? So this is a good question actually.
Yeah, well, I don't know what is Sushma's setting, like whether she is in a clinical setting, if she has access to her previous data. How do you utilize this time for research? I think this is the right time for research. You can read a lot, you can think of new ideas, you can do literature review. All the writing that you wanted to do, you can start writing, including how your life is affected by COVID. Any writing is still writing. Okay, so you can do a lot of this. You can do a lot of reading and generating ideas. In fact, one of Professor Elipeli's colleague, Professor Miguel Garcia Perez, he's a Spanish scientist. What he does is he actually writes the paper before actually doing the study. Okay, he's so thorough in his mind. He's so thorough with his hypothesis that he will write a paper. He will generate an Excel file in which he will put dummy data. Okay, and then he will write entire hypothesis. So he will say, okay, if I get a result like this, if I see the function of the graph like this, I know this is what is happening and it is explained by this physiology. But if it comes like this, then this is the hypothesis that will support that result. So he will write a whole paper, and he will have the Excel data sheet ready, and all he has to now do is go into the lab, collect the data, and the dummy data will be replaced by real data. So the graph, figure, everything gets generated, and then there you have your paper ready. Okay, everybody will do, we all do exploratory research, and we say, oh, okay, we will write based on whatever we get. A solid scientist will actually have their outcome in their head based on their hypothesis. They can write a paper and then collect data. So if you are in that mode, maybe this is a good time to experiment. Do a thinking about it, write a paper. Once COVID is out, then collect your data, and then you already have a paper written, you fit the data.
Yeah, I think now, Susma ma'am, you can go and start writing dummy data. Okay, now this much question we have so far. Let me check once again. Okay.
How long are your webinars, by the way?
Actually, it's for 2 hours.
Oh, really? Okay.
So
I thought it would be.
yeah. No. No, I think it's time to wrap up. So uh, before ending our session, we truly depict our gratitude to Dr. Premnandhini. It was very informative session. I think lots of people get lots of ideas how to go for research writing. So before ending our session, I would like to say our attendees to, if you want more resources like this webinar, you can just subscribe our channel, and you can also follow us in YouTube, and you can also follow up in YouTube as well as in Insta and the Facebook for more update. So this is the end, and we are very thankful. Before ending session, will you like to add anything, Doctor?
Yeah, I just saw a question from Sobik Chail. I think we missed that. It says, for making small ophthalmic instruments related paper, which journal is preferable?
Okay.
You have a journal called Translational Vision Science and Technology, TVST. We had developed a pediatric perimeter device, and we published that in that journal. So that is one journal which you can look at. And also there are probably other instrumentation journals that are available. So it depends on what is it. Are you just looking at the engineering aspect of making that instrument, in which case you could target engineering journals? But if you have collected data and you're trying to make a point where you are saying that here is a new device and it can be clinically useful, then TVST, Translational Vision Science and Technology, is a good journal where you can target your paper. Oh, and by the way, well, thanks, Smita. I hope people are not intimidated, because I was trying to sort of hold rigor and say that it's very important that we all follow ethics. I think that's very important. So don't get discouraged and don't think it's hard. It's not hard. Start small. Everybody, all of us start small, okay? And don't get disappointed if you have a rejection. I have had as I said, I had a rejection like 12 times or some times, I don't know. So that's okay. There is always a learning, and so don't give up. If you really have a passion for research, then you should have patience for doing it, and you need to persevere. So I again thank you for your opportunity. I thank Mero Eye people for organizing this. Hope it was useful for everybody. Bye.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you so
So
much.
want to little bit points here. Note, ma'am. Also, we started our journal or magazine, like to initiate the how to approach the journal and how can we at least connect with the people. So basically, we're trying with the students and some of the clinicians here. It's not like directly going to the PhD or high level officials. This is only we are practicing for the opinion or review article or case review or cases. So what would be the best suggest for us to start the such type of journey?
See, I'm glad that you guys are doing this, and that's a good platform where you can encourage people who want to write and publish something, right? So, so that's like a little journal within your circle of community for Nepal, or I don't know if you also have Indian optometrists sort of submit. That's a good platform. Uh, and once when you see there is a lot of interest for this, what you should start doing is increase the scientific rigor on it. Okay, start putting a panel and who can give their time. Uh, they need to be very committed. Okay, because there are many people who are on editorial board and all that for other journals, and so if you reach out to people like that, they might say that this is a very good effort, but they don't have the time for this. Okay, so one way is, see, you guys are as I suppose Nepal optometry is still at its infancy, and Indian optometry probably is a little bit over the infancy. Probably they are in their adolescent stage. Okay, so all of us are learning here, and the good way to do is there are a lot of very senior scientists who have retired. Okay, and they probably are willing to help you people out, so you can ask them. So instead of reaching out to somebody who is like in their mid career and who's already busy doing several other things, and when they say that no, I cannot be an editor on your group, or I cannot read and all that, instead target people who have retired. Okay, and because they are looking, say for example Professor Leah Hivarinen, she's a great example. So I have worked with Leah also. We had an article published with Leah. And she is somebody who is very willing to share and interact with people in different countries, absolutely willing to share knowledge and share resources. She's helped several clinics in India also. So somebody like Professor Leah might be a good person with whom you can interact. And you can say, ma'am, will you be able to, sort of review some of the article for us and tell us what are the mistakes, or how would you give your opinion on it. So you guys write articles and then you can send it out and say, can you review this for us, and they would review and give it back to you. So slowly, once you guys, again, it's all practice, it's not a big deal. At the end of it, if the 100 10 20 times you do it, then you're going to be the expert yourselves. So if you have like-minded people who want to really bring up publishing and all of that and hold it to a high scientific rigor and standard, then first network with these giants. And once when they are giving you the guidance, you will learn through this process on how they are reviewing, what's the thought process. And then you guys can be independent on your own. After that, you don't need anybody else because you know the trick of the trade. So start it out, let people write, you guys review for each other and see how easy it is to read. Give it to somebody who's new and see whether they can understand. And once when you know that the writing is getting good, then have people sort of submit it to international journals, international peer-reviewed journals. And once you know that you're able to do it, then you raise your thing on a higher standard, and then what you started out as a small effort eventually can become a journal that is getting listed in that list that I showed you. But it will get listed only if you hold the scientific rigor to it.
Okay. So still the main problem is like we are having the articles, but I remember some of the articles there. Actually, we can't find such a delegates for review as well. So I don't know, either we can like directly send to any delegates or directly to get a review, or we have to think before that sending the articles. And this is the dilemma. And another thing is, this is a very long-term process, and we are basically starting from the student level on our investment. So if you see the process, like it's so going on very slowly, and it's a very long-term process. So like government or like might be the other institute can be hold such type of things, but it's still more focusing on the journal things and like the scientific things makes us so like difficult to hold the scenario or the system. So we are currently we are focusing on the magazine as well, and name also the journal. And is this create a problem either saying the journal or magazine in the same time?
No, you can have a magazine, and magazine is a little more casual reading, and in that you can have somebody write an article. Okay, it may not be called a scientific article or a typical journal article, but it still has that flavor, right? And once when you know that the people who are writing are very good in their writing, you can encourage them to sort of make submissions to international journals. Not the same thing. I mean, you can publish the same thing provided your magazine is not out in the internet as an open thing. Because if you have submitted somewhere, then you cannot submit the same piece to an journal article. Okay, so it has to be modified. So starting a magazine and having one or two sort of scientific sort of papers is a good idea. Only thing is it will not be called a journal article because the place where it goes in is a magazine, right? Which is okay. And it doesn't have to be a research study per se. It could be somebody's perspective. It could be somebody's experience of practicing optometry in Nepal for the past 10 years. What's the kind of patients they see, some profile of it. But it gives them an hang of writing. One of the things that you guys can also do is see if you can actually have some collaborators uh, with whom you can work, and and then that collaboration will you learn something through that collaboration of how this paper is getting written. Okay, so initially you guys join as collaborators, but remember, uh, like if we are, I have a collaborators too now in Schepens. But if it is my idea and my everything, then I am the first author, I am the corresponding author. Okay, because the article should not get published because my collaborator is in Harvard Medical School. You see what I'm saying? So the reason is not that I'm egoistic and I'm selfish. All I'm saying is credit should be given where credit is due. So if in Nepal you guys are doing all the hard work, but you have a big name and that is helping you to get published, that is okay. But it should not be called as, oh, the Harvard researchers helped people in Nepal and they found this, because they did. You guys did all the work. So Nepal researchers, okay, did the study and they collaborated with Harvard for whatever, and that is how the news should be. Okay, but early starting stages, it is okay. Let them get the credit. You guys learn the way of how you're doing it. Once when you learn it, then don't look out for collaborations. If you're sustained, if you're self-sufficient, you can do it on your own. Now the thing is this, Kapil, you said it, and that is the fact. That's the bitter truth, and that's why I said at the starting of my presentation, research is not so much so on intelligence alone. It is a patience, perseverance. It is a long drawn process. It can be boring. It is time. Like my PhD work got published after 2 years. Okay, people should have that patience to endure that. If you don't have that patience, you cannot really be in research and really make a change. Okay, so you guys should be willing to accept that fact. Now I so I have been, I can't even think, like 2002 I probably started grad school, so that's 18 years. And that's a long time, and I am telling you after 18 years that I don't think I'm a scholar. I'm still learning, right? So it is, and I'm okay with the fact. I'm okay about it. Uh, and Eli Peli has taken him all those years. So don't get overwhelmed by looking at, oh, they are all big, and we don't have that big people. Everybody started small. The important thing is you should start. You should write, practice. Your magazine hopefully will become a reputed scientific journal, provided you hold the scientific rigor to it.
Hopefully, we are working for it actually since long
Yeah,
time.
and the more you guys enroll and get trained in research methodology, like one of the person was asking, the more you try to get some sort of a flavor for how this is done. If you know that, then you guys can actually do it. It's not hard. Once you know how to, it only takes like 2-3 papers, and you will get the idea for how this is done. It's not too hard.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So you have any question, Kapil?
No.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
Sure.
of course, Kapil.
So I see Monica here. Is this the same Monica Thakur from Nepal? Is it the same person?
Monica. Actually, Monica ma'am, if you want
Or is
to
this a
answer, you can just.
Well, regardless. Okay, the reason I asked is
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Nandini.
so
We can take.
the reason I asked is Monica Thakur is a great example. Okay, she's joined my lab. She came in March. Okay, so we are what and that's COVID. Somebody asked now it's COVID time, and what do we do now? So Monica came in March and joined my lab, and March, April, May, right? In 3 months, we did a study, okay, regarding tele-IELTS tools and all that. We finished the study, we have written the paper, and Monica played a significant role in writing that paper. She's the second author on that paper, okay? The paper might get submitted in a day or two. We are targeting Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. So here is Monica. Within 3 months, she had the capacity to learn, and she has already written her first paper. And I'm very positive that it will get published. And yeah, so it's not hard. So don't think it will take 30 years. I want to give the other side of the story, that it can be very quick. I mean, it's actually the fastest project that I have ever done and written, almost ready to submit. So it is possible. Okay, so that's your positive story, and it's good to end with a positive story.
Okay, best wishes for Monica ma'am. I hope our journal will publish soon. So I guess we are done with question, and this was very informative. Okay, actually now we don't have any questions so far. So now I already closed our session till I missed one question from one attendee. Okay, now this brings to the end of our session, and thank you so much, Doctor, for sharing such a informative, making this such an informative session. Hopefully, those who are seeking for that how to write research paper, they find a clue and a clue for writing paper. And like me, who is still unknown how to write research, but depend on like you said, dummy articles, they will find way, because I learned a lot of from you, Doctor. So likewise, this is the end of our session. Hope everyone please do subscribe our channel and follow us in WhatsApp and Facebook. Have a good day and be motivated to write research paper.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you, folks. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.